Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. So one of the biggest roadblocks gardeners can face, especially at this time of year and with everything going on, is not enough compost. So in this video I'm going to show you how to garden without compost and also how to best make use of the compost that you have left. Now in terms of compost alternatives, these should only be seen as a short-term fix because I believe you should prioritize making your own compost. So if you aren't making enough, towards the end of the video I'm going to give you some tips to help you increase your compost production. As I mentioned, these should just be short-term fixes, but the good news is that you have plenty of choice. But firstly, you need to take stock of your current compost levels. So have a look at how much you have, and if there is still a bit left, it's vital that you prioritize this just for your seeds and your seedlings, because this is the most important part of a plant's journey. Right at the beginning, you've got to nourish it so it grows a strong, healthy root system. Now there's one really easy way of making that little bit of compost go a lot further, and that's actually by mixing it with either some topsoil or some used compost. So perhaps you grew potatoes in containers last year and you've tipped out the containers, and yes, you won't want to plant a new crop into it, but what you could do is mix some fresh compost in with that old compost or perhaps the topsoil. So aim for a ratio of around 1 part good compost to 3 or 4 parts bad compost or topsoil, and this is going to be a perfectly adequate seed starting mix. Something that you might be wanting to do with compost at this time of year is mulching your perennials with it to ensure spring and summer gluts, and this is a red currant that I propagated probably when I was 12 or 13 years old. But for the time being, you can really get by just by using some wood chip and mulching it with wood chip instead, because the great thing about perennials is that they aren't super nutrient hungry. So we've looked very briefly at how we can make compost last a bit longer, and I'm here on a lawn and we've cut the lawn, got some grass clippings. At the moment we're not going to cut the lawn probably for a couple of weeks, as we're going to let all of the dandelions flower to provide vital nectar and pollen for our pollinators. But grass clippings are one of the most underutilized resources for gardeners, and the most important thing though is to use grass clippings, even if you don't have your own lawn, to use grass clippings that haven't been sprayed. So if you have neighbours who don't spray their lawns with chemicals, then by all means ask them to see if you can use their grass clippings in your garden. So let's head on up and I'll show you just how to use these as a short-term compost alternative. Before I apply the grass clippings, I'm just giving this area around the broad beans a very quick hoe, just to get rid of any weeds so I don't have to come back to them later on, and having the recent rain has made them pop out to say hello. So that'll do for now. The important thing with grass clippings is to never apply them too thickly, especially if you're in a UK climate. This is because firstly, if you apply them too thickly, it makes excellent slug habitat for slugs to hide underneath. The other thing though that happens if you apply too thickly is that underneath it'll form a thick sludge that can also smell, and it just isn't too nice to have in the garden. So what you should do instead is grab a bit and just spread it lightly, just forming a very light layer around the soil like this. And you want to do this preferably kind of early in the morning on a hot sunny day, because what's going to happen is the sun is going to come down, help these wilt, and with that wilting they're going to break down. And I always find that if you put organic matter on the surface of the soil, it's going to decompose a lot faster than putting it straight into the compost bin. And grass clippings being high in nitrogen are just going to help add nitrogen to this bed, and also some other nutrients as well, but something that is just really quick and easy to do. And with grass being such a productive crop, you could do this, I'd say, perhaps once a month or even twice a month during spring and summer, and adding just these little bits is all going to add up and contribute to being able to get by for a season without any compost. Now I'm going to show you something else that you can apply in a similar way to your garden beds. Apart from grass clippings, there are two other things that you can also add as a light mulch to help add nutrients to the soil. The first, a wood ash, and the second is used coffee grounds. And this is something that I actually go into some detail in my book, Grow Food for Free, because the hardest part getting started growing food for free is access to compost. So these two things working together, as well with grass clippings, work really well. So firstly is wood ash. You can see here that there are actually little bits of charcoal. This is just, I'm just leaving it in, and I'm going to apply it because this charcoal, if you break it up, can act as biochar. So it will soak up all of the nutrients and then provide a slow release of nutrients over the next few years and help keep your soil nice and fertile. Wood ash is high in potassium primarily, but it also has a respectable amount of phosphorus, both super useful for plant growth, all-round plant growth. Now the thing missing though is nitrogen, and that is where your used coffee grounds come in. A lot of people say that you can't use coffee grounds because they're high in acid or high acidity, but the thing is, when you brew them and then you get the used coffee grounds after, a lot of the acidity has gone, so I really wouldn't worry at all. I think the easiest way to apply this is to actually mix them both together, and then once you've mixed them nicely, it's almost like you're baking a chocolate brownie or something, is get quite low, and just around the plants you want to add a mulch of it, and it doesn't need to be too much. And again, I'd say just apply this once a month, and this is all going to really contribute. Something that you could actually do which will be beneficial is doing this right before some rain or right before watering. The reason why is that the rain and the water will help move it, or the nutrients, down into the roots, just to speed up that process a bit. Again, these are more of a low release over the long term. It's not going to be instant. I'll come on to that a little bit later on, but it does make a huge difference. Another fantastic way of being able to grow food without needing compost is using a method called chop and drop. And this is comfrey. Comfrey is a fantastic plant for that. It replaces animal manures. It's just so full of nutrients. And I'm going to show you about a minute-long clip that I did with Tim and Maddie Harland, who are the editors of the Permaculture magazine, which you should totally check out, where they explain how they use chop and drop to get their beds prepared with nutrients early on in spring. And you can also do this throughout the year, providing that you'll give it around a month or two for the materials to break down before planting into.
We grow a lot of comfrey, and this is because it has so many uses in a permaculture garden. First of all, if we let it flower, it's fantastic bee forage. Secondly, it's a dynamic accumulator, so the long tap roots go into the subsoil and bring up the minerals and the nutrients. We use it as a compost activator, so it speeds up the composting process. So we cut it and put it in the compost with our browns. We also use it as a mulch on the raised vegetable patch, and for instance we're just about to cut back our globe artichokes that have finished producing for the year, and they will sprout from the base. The comfrey will provide a mulch. It will mulch out weeds, it will provide nutrients for the new growth, and it will provide some protection for those tender new growth of artichoke from the frost during the winter.
If you want to find out a bit more about the Permaculture magazine, which is a fantastic source of growing information and more, then there'll be a link down below in the video description. The thing that I haven't mentioned yet, which is also an alternative to compost, is liquid feed. Now I have a love-hate relationship with liquid feed, but it does do the job, especially if you are really struggling for compost and you're looking at having some nutrients. And the great thing about liquid feed is that you have water soluble nutrients. So when you water the plants with it, the nutrients are going to go down to the roots, which is a lot faster than just mulching on the top. Now, comfrey is a wonderful resource that you can use as a liquid feed, like this, okay? And then all you want to do is add it into a bucket. So this is a bird fat ball bucket, you know, you can just use that. And you can use other materials, you can use old weeds, you can use farmyard manure, you can also use things like nettles. Just add them in, kind of fill it up near the top of the bucket. And then what you'll do is you'll fill this with water and put the lid on, and then you're going to leave it for around 2 or 3 weeks. Open the lid, it's going to stink, but then strain it either through some old clothing or something and collect the liquid, and then dilute that liquid around 1 part liquid feed to 10 or 12 parts water, and water your plants as normal. And it's a great way of being able to get by, particularly if you're growing food in containers. We've looked at a few alternatives on how we can get by with growing food without needing compost. But the most important thing I need you to take away is to have the idea of diversity, because it's not good to just use one of those methods for the whole year. For example, just using grass clippings, as this is going to create a nutrient imbalance. Nature thrives on diversity, and the same thing needs to be applied in your garden when it comes to looking at soil health. So the most important thing is to use a little and often approach of a range of different ways of adding nutrients into the ground. Now, for me, the most important thing to ensure long-term resilience of the garden is by investing more of your time and energy into producing and creating more homemade compost. Compost is the currency of the garden. It's so important, and being able to create diverse compost to then add into your garden is huge, and not needing to rely on external sources so much. So if you have a small garden and you've used it all up for growing, I would greatly consider removing or sacrificing a bit of your growing space so you can add another compost bin or 2. And you can grow, up compost bins, you can add hanging planters, you can still grow on them, but what you create inside the bin makes all the difference. Now, a really easy way of being able to source more materials, because sometimes the hardest part is filling them up, is just getting your neighbours involved. Get them to save all of their cardboard, newspaper, vegetable scraps, even give them a bucket and collect it maybe once a week, add it to your compost bin, and very quickly you'll see those compost bins fill up, and within a year you'll suddenly find yourself with a lot more compost to play with. The final thing that you could do is to consider investing in bulk compost. This is municipal compost, and it's pretty good stuff actually. The great thing about bulk compost is that it's a lot cheaper than buying bags of compost. So for me, this is 10mm screened, not 25mm, 10mm is what you want. A tonne costs around £40, and yes, there is a bit of delivery, but if you group together as a load of you, as say the gardeners on your street, and invest in getting a load of compost in one go, it does become hugely economical, and you could keep this somewhere as an emergency supply. So once every other bit of your compost piles and homemade compost has been used up, you know that you've got this emergency bank of compost to use. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more on this subject, there's a video which I do recommend. It's an old video, but it's one where I talk about a 4-base system on creating your own homemade compost, and also another much older video about how you can grow food in a bit more detail using grass and hay.